Welcome to the Graduate College of Social Work. We are excited for you to begin your journey at this historic time of both challenge and opportunity. By way of introduction to our program and profession, we'd like to share some of the ways our students, faculty, staff, and alumni have responded to the COVID-19 pandemic and the uprisings that occurred this summer following the murder of George Floyd. I am incredibly proud of and inspired by efforts to not only provide support, but also to lead, advocate, and reimagine solutions to fighting injustice.
Telling the stories of the University of Houston, this is a UH Moment.
Social workers are often overlooked members of the front line during the COVID-19 pandemic, providing essential face-to-face services for victims of domestic violence, child welfare, and the homeless.
How many social workers are out there still performing essential services but have no protection for themselves or their clients? They run errands for their clients, they go grocery shopping, they might provide crisis counseling. The shelters are still open.
UH Associate Professor of Social Work, McLean Sampson, is leading the charge to identify and distribute masks to Houston area social work agencies in need. Over 50 alumni, faculty, staff, and students from the Graduate College of Social Work volunteered to help by donating their time and materials to sew masks for the social workers and their clients.
When people are in a helping field like social work, they aren't going to quit helping during these times. They actually feel more inclined to help.
As in any crisis, we knew social workers would be called upon to provide critical support during the pandemic. GCSW faculty member Shira Jennings was appointed by Mayor Sylvester Turner to serve on the City of Houston's Health Equity Response Task Force to address the disproportionate number of Black Americans dying from COVID-19. And knowing that our alumni serve critical roles in agencies throughout Houston, we began a series of conversations with GCSW alumni whose leadership is informed by their social work values and perspectives, trained to identify and fight injustice.
We have those kind of questions that you might ask in every situation, a crisis. Why is it that the poorest people are the people who have the worst consequences or the worst outcomes? So I think that's a basic question that we could begin to look at as a community to figure out then why is it that the poverty and the poorest people suffer more disproportionately than anyone else. And then that helps to drive us on activities and implement interventions and things that we can work together on. We hear it said a lot that we're all in this together. So I think not just are we all in the uncertainty of the moment that we're in, but we're all in it together in terms of how we're going to proceed as we come out of it.
One of the big opportunities that I see definitely is that there's a lot of government assistance going on right now. And it doesn't have to be assistance. It could just be the way that governments operate, right? The way that our government and our economy are structured need to shift in ways that truly protect and support the very baseline of our sustainability as a society. And I think for so long we thought of the economy as a thing that is separate from us, but actually we have so much more power and control in it than we think we do. And when it comes to the government, I think it's becoming more and more apparent that we ought to have more power and control than we actually do. And so I think it's really a good opportunity to be showing which individuals or which offices of elected officials are actually doing things for the community and highlighting the ways that people are voting on things like the CARES Act or voting on the Family First Coronavirus Act, right? And then reminding them when all of this is over, remember how much that did for our economy, remember how much that did for people's ability to get out of this.
Right.
And I think that the more we can be tying that policy and more of that collective whole idea to everyday life, the better off we'll all be.
When we talk about policy, we always talk about unintended consequences, right? So what were the positive unintended consequences that are going to come out of this that we may not be able to see right now because we're just so in crisis, right? Like we're in crisis mode. But later, we were going to want to track that. So I think as social workers, we're in such a unique position in our community to hear those stories. Like sometimes I forget that there's people that don't live in the place that social workers live in. And then I feel even more honored and gifted at hearing those stories. But that's also a responsibility for us. And those stories, those positive stories, are going to be just as impactful when we change legislation and we change systems and we push policy post-COVID as they are with the negative things, right? So we got to have the balance of both.
Well, that's a great way to end, because real change comes with policy change.
Yeah.
Though faced with significant challenges themselves, many of our students stepped right into the role of their chosen profession. MSW Online student Mary Beth Cole was invited to serve as a contributor and provide social work perspective for the COVID-19 collaboration project. And MSW student Jemiah Walker provided critical support during the early stages of the pandemic as a youth care worker at Parks Youth Ranch, an emergency shelter for youth ages 7 to 17 at risk of homelessness. As the semester came to an end with our first ever virtual graduation, we were met with the devastating effects of a different public health crisis: racism. So this summer I selected Felon, a book of poems by Reginald Dwayne Betts, that through the author's own lived experiences tells of the harmful effects of incarceration. But as we've watched the last several weeks unfold, as we've seen the pandemic continue to disproportionately impact Black Americans, and as we've all watched in horror at the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Sean Reed, and Tony McDade, each at the hands of law enforcement, as well as the murder of Ahmaud Arbery at the hands of white vigilantes, I began to think that we needed to be reading more. The problem of mass incarceration and the prison industrial complex is just one of the problems facing Black people in America. And at the root of each of these problems is racism. Racism in its very overt forms, and racism in the more subtle forms that people of color have to deal with day in and day out, that is often not talked about, but needs to be talked about. So this year I selected a companion book, Citizen, an American Lyric by Claudia Rankine. These two books in tandem provide a way to look at and talk about racism and the harm it causes through our systems and our institutions, but also in the day-to-day interactions we experience. Because regardless of whether it's overt harm, such as the harm caused by mass incarceration, or the direct harm inflicted on Black Americans by law enforcement, or it's the more subtle acts of racism that manifest through microaggressions, or as Dr. Ibram Kendi calls them, the racist abuse that people of color face in our society every day. The harm and the destruction that racism causes is the biggest challenge we face in our society. In another show of activism and advocacy, a group led by GCSW students formed UH Revolution to organize and call for changes to address institutional racism at the University of Houston. The petition they launched has received over 1,500 signatures to date, and a number of the organizers were invited to serve in leadership roles at the university to help guide and create the solutions that will bring change. Both the pandemic and the uprisings have illuminated the need for real change. Calls to defund the police have cast a different and necessary approach to fighting injustice into the national spotlight. Abolition-based activism is emerging as a critical framework to move beyond mere reforms and incrementalism to reimagining the systems that perpetuate and maintain racist outcomes. While abolition is by no means new, it is being increasingly embraced by the next generation of activists.
And welcome back to The Factor Uncensored. The University of Houston has a department that's launched a new movement, and it's called the Up In campaign. Now, that campaign is designed to address racism in the foster care system around this country.
Black children are over-surveilled, over-policed, and over-removed by child protection authorities, and that's been happening for decades. Here in Texas, Black children are 21% of children in foster care, even though they're only 12% of the child population. And we know that that happens because of biases. One study here in Texas showed that among children who were maltreated, Black children were 77% more likely than white children to be separated from their parents and put in foster care in lieu of receiving services in their homes. And we know that that separation causes harm to children and families. The pain and trauma that we've all seen when children are separated from their parents at the border, that's the same pain and trauma children experience when they're forcibly separated from their parents by child protection authorities. So we know that there are other ways that we can help families in need without inflicting further pain and trauma on them.
When we think about the profession of social work, because a lot of time social work has been a profession where it's about like saving and white saving, right? And it's not about saving. Like these individuals, like I really dislike when people say that we're here to give a voice to the voiceless, because nobody's voiceless. Everybody has a voice. They just need to feel empowered and equipped to utilize their voice and to feel safe enough to utilize their voice to speak up about what's happening, right? So if we're here to really dismantle the systems that are continuing to oppress and hurt our communities, we need to start doing things differently. So that's really where I see, and I'm glad, Dean, that you are doing such a great work at the GCSW in trying to make these changes happen and what you've been doing for all of these years. And there's more that needs to be done, and there's more that other schools need to do in trying to expand, right, the abolitionist movement in the work that we do. But I'm excited and I'm very optimistic about the future. And I look forward to working with all of my fellow social workers in this fight, because it's going to take all of us to really, dismantle all of these oppressive and racist systems.
I couldn't be more proud of you and all of the work that you're doing. And I hope to see many, many more of our social work alumni get involved in this work, and even our current students join this movement. I really appreciate this conversation with you today. I think this is going to be really helpful for a lot of our students who are just starting to think about abolition and what that means, and how they can get involved.